Oh, there. I picked this up yesterday. Tomahawk's album, second album, Mit Gas. Mit Gas? Mit Gas. Um, so Tomahawk are I guess, what you would term a supergroup, although, yeah, it depends on how super the players have to be, I guess, to be whether you would actually consider this group to be a supergroup. But or at least when this album was recorded, it was Mike Patton on vocals from Faith No More, Mr. Bungle, Fun to Muss, various other projects. Dwayne Dennison on guitar, and I think also main songwriter on from Jesus Lizard. John Stainer on drums. At that point, he was most famous for being the drummer in Helmet in their heyday in the 90s. He's also gone on to form the band Battles. You might have heard of. They're kind of like a weird. I don't even know how you would class Battles, but and then also Kevin. I don't know how to pronounce his name. Rutmanis, who was in the Melvins for a pretty short time, really. He was also in the Cows, who I've never heard anything from the Cows. I think the Cows are some punk band. So kind of four relatively, the projects that these guys came from were relatively important, I guess, in the 90s alternative rock, punk, metal scene. And I think it was the last video, or one of the most recent videos I did about Faith No More. Even though it was an early Faith No More album, I talked about my fandom of Mike Patton. And I think that's quite common. There's a lot of people out there who really love Mike Patton and anything that he does. And I was like that for a while as well. So I picked this up, like I said, secondhand. And not from a typical, I got this from an actual secondhand music store. And that's why the price was a little bit more than usual. This was $5 from Flying In. Is it Flying In or Flying Out? I think it's Flying Out. Flying Out Records, which is in the city, over in the city centre in Auckland. And but I was pleased to find out I had $4 of credit. So when you purchase albums from that store, you get, I think it's 10% of the value. So I think this is how it works. So say if I make a $50 purchase, no, it can't be. That doesn't make sense. Maybe it's 1%. Whatever you get, whatever purchases you make, you get a certain percentage of the total put onto credit for your next purchase. And so I made a few purchases there over the years, not many, but a few. I think I showed some about 5 months ago. I made a purchase of about 4 albums, and I probably spent about, I don't know, $20 there. And then before that, I've picked up a few bits and pieces, always secondhand, always around the $10 mark. And so anyway, yesterday I had $4 of credit, so I got this for $1, $4 discount, which is pretty cool. And I was quite surprised. I've owned this before. This came out in 2003. This was, like I said, their second album. I always loved the inlay art. It's kind of like this embossed, you can kind of see their foil effect. And if you feel it, it's textured. You can feel where it's been embossed onto the paper. Very kind of, I don't know what you call that, Baroque, neo-Baroque. Very detailed, intricate. So over here you've got some of the liner notes produced by Joe Barresi and Tomahawk. This particular album, Dwayne Dennison and John Stainer wrote the music together in Nashville, and I think recorded it as well. And they sent it to Mike Patton out in where he was. I guess he lives in San Francisco in the Bay Area, I think. And he recorded the vocals independently, at least for part of it. I don't know if they had the whole album. Maybe they came together for certain parts as well. I don't know. design, I assume this means the design of the art design is done by Martin Kfami and Mike Patton, so he had something to do with it as well. And then the disc itself is also kind of follows in the same kind of again I think quite a beautiful design. Imagine this in like a LP, a vinyl size. With all, I wonder if it's all like that. And then the vinyl, yeah, because they can't do that on the vinyl, can they? You can't put those kinds of detail. Can you? I don't think you can. But still, even just that, the kind of gold embossing would look cool on a larger scale size, wouldn't it? And there are like I said, the players. So I had their first album, the self-titled one, which came out I think in about 2001. I'm pretty sure. And I really liked the first album. The first album, if you might have seen it before, it's also the paper card, disc case, slip case. I don't know what they call them, but it's a brown. It's like a like paper color or like card paper bag color, brownish, and it's got Tomahawk with a actual tomahawk underneath it, and that came out, yeah, like I said, I think it was 2001, and I got that, and I really liked that album. Then they toured here, must have been very early 2002. Yeah, very early. And I saw them play at the St. James, no, it wasn't the St. James, it was one of the other, okay, I'm not going to go into detail about the theatres or the venues in Auckland, but it was one particular venue that doesn't exist anymore, and it was an old movie theatre, and it was all red. The room was like red. It's hard to describe. And it was like, when you went in there, it felt like an old movie theater because it had, it was like on a slope, but there was no chairs. They'd taken all the chairs out, but it was on a slope, as you imagine a movie theater would be if you took out the chairs, kind of just like this gently sloped room with steps in certain parts. And then, they had the curtains covering the screen, but the screen wasn't there anymore. And so, and it was built, that movie theater was kind of built in like this, I think the late 60s or the early 70s. So it had the kind of decor you would expect of a movie theater of that time, but everything was red. All the soundproofing on the side was all red. It kind of felt like you were in like a David Lynch movie. It was just had this really bizarre effect. Certainly when you walked into the room, it kind of had a very, I don't know, it kind of took you aback a little bit. It's kind of sad that it's gone now because it was a very kind of unique place to see live bands in. I saw them and I liked their performance. I think they're a good band. I remember I bought a T-shirt of theirs. I don't know how own it anymore, unfortunately. But yeah, I really liked that first album. I'd say I like it more than this album. I like Mick Gus as well, but I that first album's got a special place in my heart. With this album, I read some reviews of this just this morning and last night, and I was quite surprised to say that they felt this was more cohesive than the first album, than the self-titled album. Because I felt that the first album was actually very cohesive. It had a very cohesive sound. There were kind of, I guess, more variety of styles in the first album. But yeah, they felt, a few reviewers said this was more focused and cohesive. And that might have been because all the songs were written together, whereas on the first album, I think they were written across a longer time frame and then kind of collated into an album, after the fact, whereas this was all written together. For me, the thing that makes Tomahawk great is Dwayne Dennison's guitar, and I guess his songwriting. Like I said, I think he's the main songwriter from what I've read in interviews and stuff like that. It's he's got his own sound. I think he's got a very unique sound. If you listen to Jesus Lizard, and I don't know, did he do much before Jesus Lizard? He might have. I'm sure he was involved with other stuff. He worked with Hank Williams III as well. Other bits and pieces here, but I can't really, to be honest, don't really recognize many of that. But he's kind of considered to be an avant-garde rock guitarist or a noise rock punk blues guitarist. Something that was interesting listening to this. So you got Birdsong on here. Rate This Day. I think Rate This Day was the single. I think there was only one single from this. But, for example, You Can't Win, which is a great song. But if you listen to that, there's one particular part on the bridge, and then also the outro, the kind of coda of the song. The guitar sounds very Mr. Bungle-ish. Which, I don't know, yeah, if it was just coincidence. Like, obviously, he didn't write it together. I don't think he was writing. There was Mike Patton. And Mike Patton didn't write that kind of stuff on Mr. Bungle anyway. I think Trey Spruance was more responsible for the kind of musical songwriting part of Mr. Bungle. But yeah, if you listen to it, there's a few different parts. What was the other one? Maybe it's Captain Midnight, where it just sounds really Mr. Bungle-ish, but Mr. Bungle from, I'd say, from the California era, and maybe a little bit from Disco Volante era. Like I said, the outro of You Can't Win. Desastre Natural, that's kind of just like a, I don't know, he's done a few songs, Mike Patton's done a few songs like that, like, what's that song on King for a Day where he sings in Portuguese? I don't know. I can't remember. I don't know Portuguese. In this one, he sings in Italian. It's a completely. I think it's Italian and not Spanish, but I'm not showing it. Desastre Natural. That sounds Italian, doesn't it? But yeah, it's a good album. I like the album. I'm not saying it's bad. Just I like the first album more because I just think I listened to that a whole lot more. There was like one particular when that first came out, I was listened to that kind of incessantly. The last song I like as well, Action 13514. It does this kind of robotic effect on his voice, and they kind of it sounds like they're reading from a book on how to what is it? Basic principles of hand-to-hand contact, and he goes through kind of listing one. Do this, two, do this. And other thing is you can, the drums are kind of quite big, and I think that's kind of a signature of John Stainer is big drums, big sounding, kind of I guess John Bonham-esque sounding drums. And there's a few parts he plays quite. I think he would be more. What's the word? His work is more varied than John Bonham, but yeah. I don't know what to say about it really. Tomahawk went on to make other albums. They've kind of gone through periods of activity and inactivity. I think they've done about 3 albums since this. The one that came after this, a few years after, was Anonymous. And Anonymous was an album directly, I guess, what do you call it? Influenced or in homage to Native American music, but not. I remember reading an interview when that first came out, and Dwayne Dennison was saying he was interested in Native American music, but a lot of the stuff you'd find would be kind of just cheesy shit, like playing it to the most kind of stereotypical images you have, and he said he was more interested in the kind of the authentic stuff, maybe in the 19th century, and so he researched quite in depth about trying to find out, I guess, meeting with the people, or I don't know how you go about researching that, but it's an interesting record. It's kind of like it has this weird atmosphere, kind of like spooky, slightly off kilter, but there's a few really good songs on that. There's one, I think the last song about the ghost, the happy ghost. I love that song. And then after that, I think they did Oddfellows, which I admit I listened very, very. I think I've listened through to that album like once or twice, and I kind of not much. And then just recently, in the last 1 or 2 years, 2021, they released Tonic Immobility, and I've listened through to that a few times as well. But again, it seems like back when this came out, when Mick Gas came out, and the first one, it was still where a time before streaming, and it was kind of I listened more to the CDs I bought, even though this was 2003 and there was downloading and illegal downloading, and maybe even early iTunes. I was still very much kind of like buy CDs and listen to them. So your listening pool was much narrower, you know. So say I'd buy a couple of CDs a month, because probably when I bought this new 20 years ago, because this came out in 2003, so it was 20 years old now. When I bought this new, I probably bought a couple of CDs a month, because it would have been about $30 back then, and I was just a student and I wasn't rich, so I wasn't buying heaps of CDs. And so I would listen more, intently to the stuff I bought. Whereas now, because we have streaming, and so Tonic Immobility came out in 2021, but God, how much other stuff came out in that year that I was listening to and that I had easy access to. And so you just kind of don't always get the chance. Well, it's not even about the chance. You don't really have maybe the motivation to listen to that stuff that from bands that you've loved in the past, and from artists that you love and respect their work, like I do with Mike Patton and Dwayne Dennison. But it just kind of gets put on the back burner, and you think, I'll listen to it one day. And maybe you listen through it to it once and it doesn't hit you enough, and that you don't kind of go back to it. Whereas if you listen to it a whole bunch, you probably would eventually come to love it. And the thing is, I've really found, I kind of talked about this in one of the last videos, is that I don't actually listen to a whole lot of rock-based music anymore. I listen to a lot more electronic, ambient, experimental music. And then when I listen to CDs, I'm listening more to rock music. But CDs only make up a small part of my listening day, because I have to be at home in the living room to be listening to CDs, or maybe in the car. But, most of the day I'm not. I'm out working or doing whatever else I've got to do, and I'm listening off my phone, which is Spotify. So yeah, it's kind of weird. Also, another thing is that I did my fanboyish or fanboydom of Mike Patton did dissipate a bit around this time, around the early 2000s, when in the 90s with Faith No More, I absolutely loved Faith No More, and I loved Mike Patton. It was like one of my heroes. I thought he was so cool. And then when Faith No More broke up, I was really bummed. And then he came out with, he was doing still Mr. Bungle, and I kind of listened to that a bit. And I loved that, especially California, which came out in 1999. And then the Fantomas Project, which I think was 99, and then Director's Cut was 2001. I saw they toured here for the Director's Cut, and I actually met Mike Patton for 5 seconds at the Power Station music venue in Auckland. Me and my friend and his girlfriend went to see them, and we got there quite early to get decent seats, I remember. And we walked upstairs to the upstairs viewing part, and just as we were walking upstairs, Mike Patton was coming down. And I'm going, holy shit, it's Mike Patton. And all I remember, he was really short. I shouldn't say really, he wasn't like a gnome, but he was much shorter than I imagined in my mind. I think I shook his hand, or me and my friend shook his hand. I can't remember. But it was literally for 5-10 seconds. But I was like so overjoyed to have kind of, talk to my hero. And I love that Director's Cut album that they did with Fantomas. And then Tomahawk, the Tomahawk Project. And then I don't know, I guess, you don't stay, I guess you grow up and you kind of don't stay attached to one artist in particular, do you? And it wasn't that I disliked what he did, it's just because I guess there were actually some things that he released that I wasn't the biggest fan of. Like Lovage, I think is how it's pronounced, which is kind of like a lounge singer album. The lounge, almost ironic type thing he used to do a little bit in Faith No More. You get that in small helpings, and it kind of was like, oh, this is cool, that's cool. But then it was a whole album full of it. You kind of you think, oh, that's enough. Yeah, that's maybe too much. And then Peeping Tom, I think that was about 2005, 2006. And by that time, I was kind of like, yeah, I liked it as part of other things. It wasn't like kind of the center of my musical universe as it was maybe at one stage. So yeah. Anyway, Tomahawk, Mick Gus, a pretty good album. I'd say it's a 7.5 out of 10 album. Whereas the first album, I'd say for me, was an 8.5 out of 10 album. Out on the Ipecac Recordings label, which is Mike Patton's own label. A lot of the stuff he's done post Faith No More has been actually the album they did, the reunited album, Soul Invictus, they put out on Ipecac. So yeah. Anyway, we'll leave it there. Thank you for watching.